All right, I'm very excited to chat with Jon Reiss on a very specific topic, which is how to set distribution goals. Jon is a critically acclaimed filmmaker, author, and media strategist. After successfully releasing his second documentary feature, Bomb It, he decided to help others distribute and market their films. So for the last 15 years, Jon has helped loads of filmmakers successfully connect with audiences and profitably release their films. He does this under the banner of his company called 8Above, and by sharing his case studies through his Substack, you can also find through 8Above. And I would name all of the festivals and film schools and publications that he has been featured in. We would literally run out of hours in the day. And I first learned about Jon when I read his book, Think Outside the Box Office, which I think might have been released in 2009. I read it around 2011. Does that sound right, Jon?
Yeah, about end of 2009, beginning of 2010. Yeah.
All right, perfect. And I've been a fan ever since. And I'm really grateful that recently I think I can call you a friend. And I certainly call you an industry colleague I have immense respect for and loads of gratitude for the generosity that you give in sharing all of your knowledge. So please subscribe to a Substack. You can search for Jon Reiss and 8Above. And Jon is also one of the people who has been relentlessly and thankfully been pushing the message to filmmakers and the industry that when it comes to distribution, you need to focus on one goal. And so that's what we're hyper-focusing on today. So thanks, Jon, for doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Christy, and same back at you, my good friend now. And it's so awesome that we've actually connected so much over this last year, ever since having pizza at Sundance and watching the line grow across the street of the party that we then couldn't get into.
We never got into that party, but the pizza and the line was the best part.
Yeah, yeah. And actually what resulted, and this is a tip, what resulted after not getting into the line was actually much better than what would have happened inside the party. So
that is a great point, a great perspective to have. So thank you. Okay, so preach. What do you mean when you say pick one goal?
What I mean by that is that distribution is hard enough, and you have to make so many choices through not only strategizing your distribution and marketing, but also executing your distribution and marketing. You're going to be making, similar to filmmaking, like I think that Martin Scorsese quote about like what a director is someone who makes like 100 or 1,000 decisions a day. So, and that's not just the director, it's producers. Everyone on the film team has to make lots of decisions. And that continues into distribution and marketing. And if you don't have a singular true north, you're not going to be able to make consistent decisions that all direct in that same direction. And just like there's a vision in making a film and all the decisions are towards making that film the best it possibly can be, you need a true north in distribution that will make your distribution the most effective and best it can possibly be in accomplishing that singular goal. So it's not to say that you can't have subsidiary goals that you're also striving for, but when the crunch comes and you have to make a important decision, and when you're gearing your campaign, I really strongly suggest, and this is after 15 years of experience working with hundreds of filmmakers, I've never seen it work where filmmakers can strive for two goals at the same time and accomplish one goal totally well. I guess if that's the best way of putting it. So,
oh, no, it's excellently put.
Yeah.
So just like a film needs a director, you also need a director of distribution or maybe a producer of distribution?
Well, I did create this category called a producer of this crew category or a crew position called a producer of marketing and distribution. But that's, I think, and that producer, the producer of marketing and distribution or a PMD should be consulting with the filmmakers as to what their goal is. And I serve as a PMD for many films. And even when I'm not doing the full work of a PMD on a film, even when I'm just strategizing or helping to strategize the film, my first question is nearly always, even before I will work with the filmmaker, I usually ask what their goal is, what the distribution goal is. And I lay out what I feel are the different goals that make sense to me as terms of a overall distribution goal. And what I find is often that filmmakers on the same team aren't, A, sometimes have even thought of it, B, have thought about it, but then aren't aware of what the other members of their team's goals are, or C, are aware of what their other members of their team's goals are and realize they're in conflict with those goals. And then, but hopefully they are D, that everyone's thought about what the goal is, and everyone's on the same page. That's what you want to get to, is that everyone on the team is on the same page. And as a PMD being on the outside, I don't have a vested interest in this. What I'm trying to do is to have that team reach that specific goal that they want to achieve.
So you're also a therapist of marketing and distribution. You're asking the questions to guide them to find the answers within themselves.
Yes. I guess there's a new crew position, therapist of marketing and distribution.
Let's add it to IMDb.
Maybe some of the producers who have objected to the PMD credit, there's two notable ones, but I won't mention them now. I'm sure they would be more okay with therapist of marketing and distribution. That's actually pretty cool.
The TMD, the therapist of marketing and distribution.
Yeah.
John coined it here first.
Well, no, I think actually, Christy, you coined it.
I was inspired by you. This is how teamwork happens.
Okay.
You know?
Exactly.
So for goals, it's in your Substack and in your talks. I think there's 4 that you focus on. What are those 4 types of goals?
So the 4 goals are money, career, change the world, audience. That's it. I found that I have not found a film of all the films I've worked with that steps outside of those 4 goals. I feel like everything, and I'm eager still to be proven wrong at some point. I'm like, there might be a filmmaker that comes along and like, hey, I have this goal that's going to stump you. It doesn't fit into these 4 goals. There is like a 5th kind of like adjunct goal that can be accomplished with the other goals that I like to point out and I wrote about in my book. And that is to create a long-term relationship with a fan base. And that requires different techniques and different ways of distribution that fold into the other goal. So it's something to be aware of while you're trying to achieve another goal. And I try to encourage, the reason I point that out is because I really try to encourage filmmakers to do that, to think about their long-term career and understand that they're probably going to be needing to do this process over and over again, and how to create that long-term audience that they can take with them from project to project, so that it's like already, as you probably know, anyone listening to this, anyone involved in film knows that we embrace Sisyphus. Like, we're the kings of Sisyphus, right? We're the crown jewels of contemporary Sisyphus. Like, we're constantly pushing that boulder up the hill. And we will continue to do so. But anything you can do to make those hills shorter, to make the pushing the boulder up the hill less intense the next time, the better. And that's creating that long-term relationship with the fan base, is that shortening of the hills, as it were. Actually, that sounds like a post right there.
That was, I feel like we got a soundbite in there.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I don't have that as a primary goal, although it could be a primary goal, if someone is solely focused on that, I would still that would fall under audience, but it would just be a modification of a long-term relationship with the fan base. But what I'm saying is that you can do that long-term relationship even if your goal is money or is impact. There's just certain techniques that you would employ to achieve that. So the thing that I'm trying to get filmmakers to understand, like a lot of times I still hear, what is your goal? Oh, to be on Netflix. Oh, what is your goal? Oh, to have a theatrical release. Oh, what is your goal? Oh, to be nominated for an Oscar. None of those are goals. Those are all tactics, right? So those are all tactics to achieving a goal. So, and again, it's money, career, change the world, audience. Not necessarily there's no order there. So
I think it's we like to say there's no wrong answer other than all of those goals. Just like pick one and stay focused. So what would it look like? Can you give an example, real or theoretical? The filmmaker says, I'm very clear in my goal. My goal is money. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So goal is money. That's probably the hardest goal these days, to be perfectly honest. And what I normally these days, it is achievable though. It is, if you have a audience that is an underserved audience in terms of media, and especially, unfortunately, if that audience has disposable income, because if money is your goal, you do need an audience that has money, that has disposable income to spend on your media. So if you have an underserved audience that has disposable income, you can do quite well. Like, look at what Angel Studios is doing, essentially.
Impressive.
Angel Studios has an underserved audience of, conservative and then to the right audience that feels generally underserved with media, and is, you don't find a lot of that kind of content on platforms, through studio releases, etc. And they were able to connect with that audience, and that audience has disposable income, and they've been very successful. And there's Gary Hooswit had created a career out of being engaged with and creating content for a underserved audience of people who are enthusiastic about design. And he was able to connect with those. I don't know, and I'm not saying that his goal was money, but I do know that those releases were successful. And I feel that the reason those were successful was because that audience was underserved and they had disposable income. He was able to connect with them, figure out a strategy to monetize his release, and did quite well with the releases. He released 3 films and did quite well with that.
To your point, he's also built a brand. Part of building a brand is kind of having a repeat, fulfilling expectations repeatedly for that audience, and he's done that through.
He's an amazing. I'm hoping to do a case study on Eno after it's released by Distribution Advocates. Just to give a little plug for Distribution Advocates, they're going to be doing a case study, and then right after they release that case study, I'm hoping to do a case study on Eno, and hoping that we'll also dive into some of the past work as well. So, but
that would be incredible.
If you want to see a filmmaker who has had financial success, but also is amazing at connecting with an audience and keeping an audience, developing a long-term audience, he's probably one of the star examples of that.
Okay, we'll put some of those links in the description too, so people can find.
Yeah.
I think they're doing like a 1-day digital release, I think, coming up, like a 24-hour run, which looks really cool. So then if money right now is the hardest goal of those 4, is there an easy goal or an easier goal?
No, I wouldn't say. I would say no. Nothing in distribution, Christy, as you know, is easy.
Right. Sisyphus. We're back to the boulder. Got it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's the hardest one, especially, I think, if you haven't planned for it. So let's put it that way. And there's other, like if you have a genre film or a horror film, you're probably going to have better luck making money off of that than changing the world, to be honest. So it just pretty much depends on the kind of film. There's also a lot of different factors that go into a release. So goal being one of them and being the primary one. And then also there's, just as another example, like I recently did a case study with Hundreds of Beavers.
It's a really good case study. You can find it on his Substack.
Yes. And their goal was money. And we talk throughout the case study specifically of how that goal of money guided their release. And what was interesting is that most people don't go into doing a theatrical release with their goal being money, because most theatrical is a loss leader. But because of what they were able to find out in their festival run, and they used their festival run as a case study for how they would release the film eventually, and how they were able to use the festival release to find out who their true audience was, and then what worked for their true audience, what really engaged their true audience and made their true audience want to come out to theaters. That is then what they took that information, knew from that information that theatrical release would actually be successful and that they could make money from their theatrical release, and then engage the theatrical release accordingly. So just to give a bit of a methodology of how they went about that, starting with their goal being money.
It makes sense. If they had control over their release, they had a goal in mind, they started executing on that goal, they got new information that confirmed that they're on that right path, so they kept going. Have you worked with filmmakers or can a filmmaker change their goal halfway through?
Yes. So, nothing is lockstep. Have I worked with filmmakers that have changed their goals? Not really, because everyone's pretty set and kind of sticks with it. You usually change your goal when the first goal isn't working. If trying to achieve that initial goal isn't working, then that's when you would potentially pivot. But when I work with a filmmaker, part of what I do is talk to them about their goal and whether everything about the rest of the elements of their strategy would fit that goal. I'm trying to think of how much. Probably about in 10% of cases, I've talked filmmakers out of their primary goal and made them understand that maybe one of their other goals is more likely. Or it's that therapist of marketing and distribution where I'm kind of really sussing out, because a lot of times filmmakers aren't really sure and it's kind of like a dialogue to figure out like what goal they're really striving for, and using an understanding of their film, understanding of their resources, understanding of their audiences and how to reach those audiences, those major factors to figure out how that fits with trying to achieve that primary goal.
That makes sense. It sounds like there's rare cases where someone has a film, let's say their goal is money, and you look at it and you're like, there isn't a wide audience with disposable income that's passionate about this topic. So maybe we should either rethink or maybe recalibrate our expectations of meeting that goal.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is also it's important is to, I think you hit it, is to also understand what are your expectations? Like within that goal, what benchmarks are you striving for? And what benchmarks are also, and then reasonable. And then if you exceed those, that's great. But it's important to have reasonable and, just say reasonable expectations when starting out.
So if someone's coming to the table saying, all right, I don't need to make all the money back. My investors understand. So money is not a goal. My film could make some social change, but that's not really the type of film it is. I really see this film as career building. So what would some advice be or some of the distribution strategy look like for a film release that's focused on career building for the filmmaker?
Right. So the first thing that I ask in that case is what kind of career do you want to have? Because it doesn't make sense to build a career in a certain way that doesn't connect with the kind of career that you want. So, and that's also where the long-term audience development comes in, because sometimes some filmmakers who are kind of savvy and have been understanding what the current landscape is, understand that the path for them to success is to have a direct relationship with an audience that they want to develop long-term. So that's, for instance, one aspect of that. And then we would discuss the strategies that would make sense. But a lot of times when filmmakers are talking about career, a lot of it's like they want to have it easier to make their second film. Not their second, but their next film, which is, that's the more concrete example of like what a career path would be. So there's a number of things like that's where a theatrical release comes in, because theatrical releases are pretty good at, better than many other forms of release, at triggering reviews, and reviews help career. They don't necessarily, from what we've found, tremendously help butts and seats for independent films, but you're not really doing theatrical necessarily you're trying to do butts and seats because you want your theatrical to be successful, but you understand that theatrical is hard these days, so you may not make all your money back doing a theatrical. It's not usually for money, which I usually advise just to make sure if you want to do a theatrical release, you're not in this for the money. But it is a way to get reviews. And even though it's hard to get reviews these days from theatrical releases, especially for small ones, but it's better, like compared to doing an independent VOD release or a TVOD release, it's night and day. Or doing a community screenings, release. You could do 100 community screenings across the United States and there's no press whatsoever. But if you do 10 theatrical screenings and you do it in the right way, you can get some quite excellent press, including, we've gotten, I think half of our films have gotten New York Times critics picks.
Wow.
And that not only helps the life of your career, but because it's that stamp of approval that is, hard to beat these days. It's just worked its way up into that stamp of approval, but also helps the life of the film, because then it kind of tags the film throughout the internet of New York Times critics pick. And that just, the New York Times has built themselves over the last century and a half or however long, into this really, behemoth of a brand that
It's true.
but it's been harder and harder. Like now, not every film that does a full week-long run in New York is going to get a New York Times critics pick. So, or not a critics pick, even a New York Times review.
Just a review,
sorry,
yeah.
Just a review. So you have to develop a theatrical strategy that's going to work for that. The other thing for career would be a healthy festival campaign. And if and how to make sure that that festival campaign is geared towards career, so you would want to spend more time going to certain festivals. It doesn't have to be Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, Berlin, or any of those. There's plenty of other festivals that you can go and meet other people, meet other filmmakers, meet other producers, meet people who are going to help you make your next film. So that would be another factor. And then the third factor not to say this is the end of it in terms of career, but another is doing an awards campaign. But as I spend a decent amount of my time talking filmmakers out of doing awards campaigns, because there's, as you saw in this year's shortlist, all right, it was 12 films that were at Sundance, 12 or 13 films were at Sundance.
Oh, wow. I didn't catch that.
One film at Toronto, one film at Venice, and one film at Berlin. And the Film Collaborative published a study, I think it was like 8 years ago, where they analyzed all the shortlist and Oscar noms for a period of time. And it was pretty much, if you're not at Sundance, Cannes, Berlin, Toronto, your chances of being on the shortlist, or anyway, we don't have to digress into this, but
no, it's interesting though. But this is the question, but we'll hopefully dive into budget making at another time, another video.
That would be a reason for career. And so just an example, one film that we worked with called Sam Now, and career, and not only the film's career, but their career was important. So we did a theatrical release, and then they did an awards campaign, but they were very savvy about their awards campaign. And even though they didn't get shortlisted, the way they did it is they were able to meet many people throughout the documentary community, and they raised their profile within the documentary community much higher than what they were able to do even through the theatrical release, where they did get a New York Times critics pick. So I'm not, again, saying that I'm encouraging people to do awards campaigns, because they're expensive and they're not going to meet a lot of different goals. But, anyway, I've already spent too much time in this to talking about awards campaigns, because I'm pretty much against them, and I'm against the whole awards, the awards industry complex, which is what it's kind of become.
Well, we thought we were going to talk about goals, and now this is now officially a rant against awards campaigns. We will split this into 2 videos. I'm kidding, but the awards thing is interesting. I mean, I think it's topical because the shortlist for the Oscars did just come out yesterday. But I believe yesterday, the time we're recording this will release a little bit later. So it is very topical, and it does help a lot of the careers of filmmakers. They get to say they were shortlisted. And so, and again, I don't want to dive too deep into budgets, but if you're coming to this point where you realize your goal is career, some of these things cost money. And so do you recommend having a publicist? Do you budget for a publicist? Do you budget for an awards campaign? And should you be doing that much earlier in the production?
So no matter what your goal is, you should be budgeting for your whole entire release. So, and you should be doing that we're already broaching into budgeting. So, but you should be doing this certainly before you finish your film, certainly before you're in festivals. I think filmmakers should be budgeting when they're doing their budget for the whole production. And I know it's a tricky thing, because then investors are saying, oh, well, if we have to pay for distribution and marketing, what does that mean in terms of return on investment? And, it's just having a kind of an honest discussion with your investors if you're doing an equity. And the way to phrase it is that the only way to have a chance at making your money back is to budget in advance for distribution and marketing. But anyway, most filmmakers don't do that. Most filmmakers don't raise money for distribution and marketing, and even the ones in before post-production. And I've spoken to several who have raised money for distribution and marketing before post-production and then spent the money on post-production. But having an understanding that you do need to raise money for distribution and marketing, and you need to have some money for distribution and marketing, goes back towards that. Yes, theatrical releases is probably more expensive than most types of campaigns, depending on how involved your impact campaign. Impact campaigns can be pretty expensive, as Christy, from your history. And especially if you're trying to do if you're trying to influence legislation, et cetera. But, theatrical releases can cost money. And then the reason that I argue against awards campaigns, even though when they make sense, is that it's a lot of money to do an awards campaign. I mean, doing a theatrical, it's tough to do a theatrical for less than 75. You can do one really bare bones for 50, but, that's stretching it. So you're looking at 75 to 100, and then you can spend more. Plenty of people spend, it's easy to spend 150, 250, et cetera, on a theatrical release, and again, more. And awards campaigns, like the scrappiest DIY awards campaign would probably be in the 30 to 50, and then you're not really doing that much. And generally, I haven't seen even a borderline awards campaign being less than 100 to 150. And then, the platforms spend $3 to $4 million
Oh, yeah.
on their campaigns, and that's what you're competing against. And that's part of what's unconscionable is that you could fund 8 to 12 films production and distribution and marketing for the cost of one awards campaign, and maybe not 8 to 12, say 4 healthy documentary films or fiction films plus a release for those films for the price of a single awards campaign. And that's what my bigger issue with awards campaigns are.
It's good to talk about this again. It's you going back to the goals of your 4 goals. No matter what, you're going to need a budget for it. It's just how you spend that budget. You may spend it on awards, you may spend it on theatrical, you may spend it on impact producers and community outreach. It could be your own travel budget for film festivals. But either way, no matter what, you need to reserve some sort of the budget so that when you sort out your goal, if you haven't done it by production, at least before you do distribution, you have funds to help fulfill the goal that you have for your distribution.
And that's why I also question, and this is where, if you have impact as a goal, and it's someone saying, oh, let's do an awards campaign. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, that's going to cost you at least $150,000, and you can do a lot of impact for $150,000. You can do a tremendous amount of impact for that
free
much
screenings,
money.
venue rent outs, like go to schools,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why it's important to know what the goal is, and how each tactic fits within achieving that goal.
All right. I have one more question for you, but any other thoughts on goals?
You had many more questions in the
We covered them all.
email. Oh, we did?
We covered them all. Yes. Oh, hang on. You want me to double check? Let's see.
And no, I was supposed to give more examples. I did bring more examples, but I don't know. We might be running out of time.
We've got all the time in the world. The internet is endless time for us to chat.
So for instance, like one of the films that we worked on, and this is just a good example of money versus impact. It's a film about Alzheimer's and dementia. It's actually unique because it's kind of a hopeful look at Alzheimer's and dementia, and not only different kinds of care that is more meaningful for families, but also the people suffering from it, but also things that you can do to prevent the spread or the onset of it. And so their goal was awareness, impact in a sense, but strictly there. And then whenever there's an impact goal, whenever there's one of these goals, you need to then find out what the underlying goal is. So, and I'll use a couple of examples to show that. So especially when you're talking about impact, like, so you say, I want to change the world. Well, how? Like, what is that? It's like, often the term is, what is your theory of change? But in a sense, what is the change that you're trying to accomplish? And for them, they just want as many people to see the film, which kind of crosses over into audience. But the reason it's impact is because they want to raise awareness about dementia and Alzheimer's and show these different kinds of alternatives and these different ways of looking at it. So when we did our campaign, the first 2 months of the campaign, we let the film be available for free. So if our goal was money in any way, shape, or form, we would never have done that, because we already found out from our audience that even charging $50 to $75 for a screening turns some of our potential viewers, or especially hosts, off. We can't do that, especially because we wanted to screen in the global South and other countries. And $50 to $75 there means a lot more than it means to people here. So by doing that, we are able to do 120 screenings in 28 countries in 2 months, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
And then since then, we decided, okay, well, then the campaign has to kind of help pay for itself. So that was I guess in a sense, that's one of your pivots.
It's a pivot, right? The goal changed slightly, but you did achieve your first goal a bit, and then you got traction. We achieved the first goal,
but then we realized that the money that their campaign had to start paying for itself. So we started charging for the screenings. And I think since that 2-month period, and I think it's been even over a year since then. So we've added, I guess, 90 screenings in a year and 2 additional countries compared to 120 screenings in 2 months. So just to give you an example of like impact versus money, the very real basic example. And then just as another example in terms of fine tuning like audience, so audience being a goal. So we worked with a film called My Love Affair with Marriage, which is also on the Kinema platform. And their goal was not just audience, but audience seeing the film in theaters with them. So that what we did is we did a theatrical and community screening and educational release. And we booked a tour so that the filmmakers could go to nearly every screening, so that it would be timed out in a way so that they could go to every screening. And that was their goal. They raised money for that to achieve that. Their backers, their not only Kickstarter, their variety of different backers believed in it. And so they were able to, do that goal and accomplish that goal. And, so we were we had 35 theatrical cities and then another 15 cities outside of the community screenings and another New York Times Critics Pick, et cetera. So although that's an example of a primary goal, which is audience, defined as theatrical audience, but then achieving subsidiary goals. So achieved career goals, and so a career goal that was achieved, and that was a subsidiary goal. And so not only did they get good, they actually got massive press, not just the New York Times Critics Pick, but then they also elevated their status amongst all their European compatriots because they're European and American. And all these European filmmakers were going, oh my God, how did you do a theatrical release? No one can do a theatrical release in the United States. So everyone was like genuflecting in front of them. It's like, how did you achieve this kind of a thing? So
what I'm hearing is we're talking distribution strategy, but really each of these cases the film is a company or a business. You put together a business model, essentially. You're raising money to create it, and then you also have to market it and get it out there. If you don't raise money for those elements of it, if you don't have those goals set, you don't know that you need to raise money or have it in the business model for the film to have the theatrical release, to have the travel budget, to be able to do the press. And so I think it's also a shift in thinking of not where does my film fall, whatever my goal is, how do I fall into the traditional windows or a traditional release, but more how am I building something that's unique and specific to my film, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah.
And that's a cool one too. That's an animated film too, right?
Yes. It's a feminist animated film for adults. So
but that's unique. It makes it different.
It's very unique. Yes, it's very unique. And yeah, and there is an audience for adult animation, and there's an audience, and that's, what's interesting is that we took an impact approach to make that work. So we reached out to Latvian groups because it's a Latvian American filmmaker. The film deals with domestic violence. So a lot of domestic violence groups, women's groups, because it's a women director and how it deals with the subject matter, and then animators, the animation community. So
that's right. Animation's popular with adults. Crunchyroll's huge now. Adult Swim was popular for a reason. So it makes sense.
Although this isn't quite the Adult Swim kind of.
No, it's a little bit more impact oriented. It's personal.
Yes, Hundreds of Beavers is more Adult Swim. Yes.
That is true. I still haven't seen Hundreds of Beavers, but I know so much about it from the campaign. I know. I have to actually watch it. I love their social media. So any other examples of like filmmakers really setting a goal and executing against it?
We're doing Sabbath Queen now, and Sandy's goal is very similar to My Love Affair with Marriage, his audience. And it's kind of like an audience kind of combined with impact in a sense. So it's because he really wants to create audience, but specifically in community, in person, where he's there and can engage with the audience. So it's almost very similar to My Love Affair with Marriage. And to structure a release around that is, it's not easy because he has to be present at every, he has to be available, and he's also still in tons of festivals. So this travel schedule and working out his schedule. And normally when you're doing a theatrical release, like we actually had pretty amazing opening weekend box office, $25,000 single screen in New York, which is kind of unheard of these days. And normally you would kind of announce that to the world, to all the theaters, and get theaters on board because, oh my God, 25,000, opening box office, and then theaters, you would line up all the theaters over the next month and a half, 2 months. So like old school traditional 3-month, 90-day theatrical window. But because Sandy wants to be at all these screenings, it will be a 6 to 9 month theatrical release. but that's really working with a filmmaker who has a clear goal and working to make sure that that goal that there are also resources to accomplish that goal.
I think we've seen that over and over again. There's been many experiments with the day and date release, and I think especially for independent films or very active filmmakers, the entrepreneurial filmmakers, if you can do it, if you have the budget, the time, resources to pull out that release, so more people get to experience it in person,
Right.
the better everything else is going to be. The better the VOD rentals, the better the streaming. Hopefully, better some streaming offers. I don't know how AVOD's doing. I think AVOD and advertising still is difficult to make money for indie films, but maybe.
Well, I think it depends on the kind of indie film. Like the cliche or the recent is that docs don't do well on Avon. But, certain kinds of indie films can do quite well on AVOD. So it just depends on the kind of film. And I think that will kind of change. We're actually going to have Film Hub, speaking of AVOD, talking on my Substack. It's talking specifically about AVOD and talking specifically about YouTube's AVOD.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Great. I will be there. I'll be listening.
Yeah, which if you talk to distributors, it's the highest grossing netting AVOD platform. Like Tubi and Pluto and Roku get lots of love and like airplay, but really it's not that I want to promote one of the giant conglomerates that are ruling our media landscape, but it is the second largest search engine in the world after Google, which is the parent company's search engine. So
it's the largest, I think, streaming platform. I thought they had like 10 or 11% market share when it comes to television watching.
Yes, if you've been watching reading Evan Shapiro lately.
I haven't actually, but I fell off his Substack, but I get his LinkedIn posts. So
yes. So Evan, if you want to see that, Evan Shapiro just did his most recent Substack was about YouTube and how they're much more significant than most people give them credit for.
Yep, I got to get back on that.
So just in terms of getting back to real basics, and this is an older statistic, so it's even harder now, 2,500 years of content is uploaded to YouTube every month. So the key is, how do you break through that noise and make your film stand out and make it so that people are finding your film? And the way you do that is by understanding who your audience is and understanding how to connect to your audience. So that just to bring back
to goals, the whole point of this, goals, yes, audience is part of it, but this one.
Yeah, exactly. Because essentially for every goal, you're trying to figure out who your audience is and how to reach that audience and convert that audience and towards whatever goal that you're trying for. So yes, slightly off the topic of goals, but actually leaning into that topic as well.
It does. It's all connected. I think our hope with some of these videos is to help the filmmakers we work with on Kinema and filmmakers looking at their distribution plans for the next films to kind of go deep on specific topics. And you are an expert in so many different areas. We could do this all day. I have like 2 other videos I want to talk to you about.
I've been actually meaning, so you're probably going to start seeing these also on my Substack, because I've been thinking, oh my God, because I do all these presentations for my distribution lab.
Yes.
And so I've been thinking of doing them also for my Substack because people like to watch videos or listen to them, et cetera. So yes, you're incentivizing me to start doing this on my own, especially since I also use Riverside. I also have delved into podcasts. And just to do a plug, if you're interested in psychedelics, I do have a podcast about people's psychedelic experiences called Transcendence. So if you're at all interested.
That is a perfect segue, because I was going to ask you, where can people find you online or any of your publications or podcasts, as you mentioned?
So you can find me online through my website, which is 8Above. So it's just the number 8 and then above.com. And you can reach out through contact, or there's other ways to sign up and just request a way to talk to me, but just on the contact page is fine. And then if you are interested in any of these topics, I'm, doing 1 to 2 webinars on significant subjects a month now with recaps of those. And then I'm trying to also get into, and then writing 1 or 2, but I'm going to try to increase the number of those posts over the next year about different aspects of distribution and marketing. So on the Substack, which is, you can just find, if you just Google Jon Reiss, JONREISS Substack, you'll find it. So there is actually an extensive 2,000 word post on distribution goals. So as a complement to this podcast, there is an extensive Substack talking exactly about everything we've just spoken
We will
about.
be posting that link in the little video captions. It'll be easy to find all of this. And yes, that post was part of the inspiration for this. So thank you.
Yeah.
It's true. All right, cool. Well, then we will wrap it up right there. Any last words?
No, I think, plugging myself is always a good last word. But
It is. You're very, very generous with your information and your case studies and what you know. So people are very lucky to work with you, and we're lucky as the industry to have you share that knowledge. So thank you.
Thanks, Christy.
And that's our episode. Thank you to our special guest, our producer and editor, Ron Pissarro, and you, the filmmakers, creators, marketers, and distributors that are dedicated to connecting audiences with great films.